evening and welcome to Today with Dr. Wendy. We've got a great show for you tonight. And we start, as you might expect, with politics. My co-host Larry Dersham and I love politics. It's very interesting. There's something for everyone, and there's always something to talk about. So this week, we just had the first vice presidential debate. It was one and done, but who won? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But first, can you believe it's just been 1 week since the president was diagnosed with COVID? It seems like months ago. We've been talking about it nonstop. He apparently kicked it to the curb over the weekend, according to him, and is back in action, back at the White House, hosting events, coughing a little bit now and then, here and there. And I believe Melania, God bless her, is also doing well, as are the other staff members. At least that's what we're hearing, that are in the president's inner circle. But because it is now in flux exactly what the second debate will look like if it occurs at all, more emphasis than ever is being put on what we just saw this week with the two vice presidential candidates. Now, I know Larry and I were probably glued to the set, as no doubt were some of you. But part of, I think, what made this interesting is that these two vice presidential candidates, now, first of all, these are trained advocates, so they did not cause a train wreck. It was actually really good television from a trial lawyer's perspective, at least. They represented their respective clients very well. But here's what made them distinguishable from perhaps any other vice presidential debate we've ever seen. They were not only surrogates, they were potential substitutes. That has to do with the age of the top of the ticket. Now, I would also think it's ironic that was the one question neither of them would answer. Pretty smart. Have you had a conversation with the presidential candidate about, God forbid, what would happen if they became incapacitated? They didn't answer that, neither of them. When they took the stage, they were wearing matching black suits, matching flag lapel pins. I thought that's where the conversation and the commonality was going to end, but it wasn't. There were several questions neither of them could answer, but they did a great job on all the rest. I thought both brought both flash and substance. That's right, both. That includes Mike Pence, who is traditionally known for being calm, cool, and collective, whereas Senator Harris always comes across as feisty and fiery and forceful. So it was a great matchup. It was great television. They both brought their A game. But there also were some subjects that neither of them were able to answer. You always see that happens a little bit. And I don't know, Larry, if you have any of your favorites that you want to interject with. What do you think stood out in terms of topics? We know the optics were good, but what about the topics?
One topic was the thing about they were asking the question, the moderator asked the question of Kamala Harris about would she do court packing, or would Joe Biden pack the Supreme Court if they were to be elected? And she came back with a really interesting answer, but I think she kind of skirted around it. She said, Harris invented history to argue against confirming Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. What Kamala Harris said, you want to talk about packing the court? Let's have that discussion. Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election, and there was a Supreme Court seat vacant with 27 days to go. Honest Abe decided to wait till the election, claimed Harris. But here's the truth. Here's what the people didn't know. In reality, Lincoln didn't send a nominee in October 1864 to the Senate because the Senate was out of session until December. He did send a nominee, Salmon Chase, to the Senate during the second day of the new session, and he was confirmed that same day.
Larry, before you go on to your next point, which I know you want to hit on again, and I think it's really important, let me interject with something I think will relate directly to what you're about to say. I think that a lot of the undecideds really watched this election carefully. And I know that part of what we always hear after a debate like this is people are squarely in their corners. If they liked Kamala Harris, they like her even more. If they liked Mike Pence, they like him even more. So I made the joke about one and done, who won. That depends on partisan politics, but not if you're an undecided. In fact, undecideds, at least according to surveys and statistics, are more swayed by sometimes style over substance. Now that surprises a lot of people because it's the substance that actually characterized this debate and really distinguished it from the debate we saw between Joe Biden and President Trump. I mean, this debate was really about issues, not insults. But I know one of the issues that's near and dear to the hearts of many of our viewers and our listeners and voters was this whole white supremacy issue. Was that cleared up any more during the vice presidential debate than it was during the presidential debate a week prior?
I don't think so. They brought up again the Charlottesville incident, which I pointed out last week when President Trump said there were fine people on both sides. He was talking about a different rally later that day where there were people that wanted to take down the statue of Robert E. Lee and others that wanted to keep it, but they were very peaceful, very appropriate. And those are the people he called really fine people. But they keep on bringing up this basically it's a lie that he called the neo-Nazis or the KKK very fine people. And there were also Antifa there. And he would never call any of those groups. He's denounced all of those groups many times. But they keep on bringing it up, thinking if they say it enough times, people will believe it.
Yeah. You know, one of the other things I know, Larry, that's important to you and also important to our listeners is, you know, speaking of history, and I know you're like the ultimate history buff, it's great to be paired with you because we also want to talk about Thomas Jefferson, the U.S. founding father and the third U.S. president, who actually drafted the Declaration of Independence. Now, I know that has a lot of relevance to some of the truths that are out there that are going to be driving the voters, won't they?
Absolutely. It's interesting. Thomas Jefferson, he said, I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery.
Nice.
Many of today's politicians, following the lead of former President Obama, wish to fundamentally change America, but they never tell you what that means. Well, today, I don't want to tell you who to vote for. I want to instead tell you what to vote for. The Declaration of Independence, the second paragraph of the Declaration sets forth the principles. It's a little bit long, but I'll quickly read it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That's men and women, of course, and that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So there's 5 principles there. God created man, our people. We are all equal. God, not government, grants humans certain rights, in particular, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those rights cannot be taken away. And governments are created with the consent of the governed to protect those rights. So as you go into the voting booth this November, ask yourself, which of these fundamental principles do you wish to alter or abolish? And let's very briefly discuss them. The right to life. Would you vote to fundamentally change the idea that humans have the inherent right to life? Hopefully your answer is no. So choose candidates or vote for candidates that honor life. How about liberty? We are regulated upside down, left and right. And that's called philanthropic tyranny by some. These political elitists want to tell us what to do. So would you vote to fundamentally change the idea that we have an inherent right to liberty? Or do you believe that if you believe in liberty, then you have to vote for candidates who uphold our right to liberty? And then the last thing, pursuit of happiness. The clear demand or requirement of socialism or communism is the destruction of our private property rights. That's what Karl Marx said in the Communist Manifesto. So would you fundamentally vote to change the idea that we have a right to property? I hope not. So as you go into that voting booth on November 3rd, please choose the candidate that supports the Declaration of Independence, the most precious rights that we have as Americans.
You know, I think that's good advice, and I wonder whether voters actually have those topics in mind as they go into the voting booth. I know that we have a lot of, for example, single issue candidates, which is why Judge Barrett is being so closely watched. Is we all know that the Supreme Court, both in the queue and on calendar, have some very important cases they're going to be considering, including, Larry, cases about the right to life, affordable health care, racism, all the types of things that characterized both last week's presidential debate and this week's vice presidential debate. We also know that we're fast tracking this nomination. She's going to have a confirmation hearing. That's going to stay on schedule. The vote hopefully will be held in person when those who have been hopefully temporarily stricken by COVID are back in action. We wish them the best. And all of those types of things really kind of swirl around the kitchen table issues that characterize what voters care about. So Larry, I'm glad you point out some of those constitutional issues as well. So we have a very jam-packed second half for you. We're hoping you will stick around. We have a guest who is actually one of our nation's leading experts on crime and crime prevention, who has just written a wonderful new book that teaches readers how to stay strong, keep the faith, and fight the good fight so we can proactively avoid being a victim of crime. By the way, that comes from scripture. You may have recognized it, 2 Timothy 4:7. It is Nancy Grace, the one and only Nancy Grace. Do not change the channel. You want to make sure you hear her second half of the show. It's going to be fantastic. So thank you this evening for spending a little bit of time with us. You are listening to Today with Dr. Wendy. Stay with us. We will be back in a flash.